My landlord had cameras where they shouldn't have been. When I first moved into that small apartment, I thought I'd finally found peace. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom on the edge of town. But after years of living with roommates, I was desperate for my own space. The rent was surprisingly reasonable, the building was quiet, and the landlord, Mr. Clark, seemed nice enough. At least at first. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with the kind of friendly but nosy energy you'd expect from someone who'd been renting properties for too long. When I toured the place, he followed me around like a shadow, talking about how he'd personally renovated every unit. Everything works perfectly, he said proudly. And I take maintenance very seriously. If something breaks, you call me, not a repair guy. At the time, that sounded reassuring. Now I know it was the first red flag. For the first few weeks, things were normal. The apartment was cozy, the neighbors kept to themselves, and I started settling into a nice rhythm. But after about a month, strange little things began to happen. The first was small. I came home one afternoon and found my front door unlocked. I remember second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd just forgotten to lock it that morning. Then, a few days later, a mug that had been on my counter was suddenly sitting on the windowsill. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. Just slightly off. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the night I heard footsteps. I'd been lying in bed around midnight when I heard the unmistakable creak of the floorboards near the living room. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to make noise. I froze. My heart started pounding. I waited, listening, but after a minute the sound stopped. I grabbed the nearest thing, a lamp, and crept out of my bedroom. The lights were off. The room was empty. The front door was locked. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I told Mr. Clark about it. I expected him to be concerned, maybe offer to change the locks. Instead he smiled like I told him a funny story. "Oh, these old buildings make all sorts of noises," he said. "Probably just pipes or something expanding in the walls." When I insisted I'd heard footsteps, his tone changed, not angry but oddly amused. "Well, if you're that worried, I can come by and check the place myself. I've got a master key." Something in the way he said that, "I've got a master key," made my skin crawl. I told him no thank you. I'd rather be home if he needed to come in. He smiled again, too wide. Of course. Tenants' privacy is very important to me. For a while I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. But that sense of being watched only grew stronger. I started noticing subtle details I'd never paid attention to before. Tiny holes near the smoke detector, a vent cover that looked newer than the others, and a faint red glimmer in the corner of my living room one night that vanished when I turned the light on. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Until one afternoon when my friend Zoe came over. She'd barely been inside 5 minutes when she frowned and said, "Why is your smoke alarm blinking like that?" I looked up and my stomach dropped. A tiny red light pulsed behind the mesh, steady, mechanical. Smoke detectors don't blink like that. We got a chair, climbed up, and unscrewed the cover. Inside wasn't a standard smoke sensor. It was a miniature camera, wired neatly into the ceiling. I froze. Zoe whispered, "What the hell?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there staring at it, realizing that every moment I'd spent in that apartment, changing clothes, sleeping, eating, had been recorded. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, I showed them the camera. They took photos, asked questions, and promised to investigate. But what made my blood run cold was when one of the officers said quietly, "You're not the first tenant to call about this building." Apparently, other residents had reported odd behavior from the landlord, unexplained visits, strange wiring, missing personal items. But no one had found actual proof until now. The police confiscated the device and told me to stay somewhere else for the night. I packed a bag and went to Zoe's apartment, trying to process everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt sick thinking about where else cameras might be hidden. The bathroom, the bedroom, anywhere. The next morning, I got a call from the police. They'd searched the rest of the unit. They found 3 more cameras. One above the air vent near the bed. One in the kitchen light fixture. And one behind a fake electrical outlet near the bathroom mirror. I remember sitting down, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. The officer told me the devices were all connected to a small receiver, hidden behind a loose panel in the hallway. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing, he said. This wasn't amateur work. When I asked if it was the landlord, he hesitated before saying, "We can't say for sure until we run the equipment for fingerprints or data. But given that he had access to your apartment." I didn't need him to finish that sentence. That afternoon I got a call from Mr. Clark. He sounded strangely calm, like nothing had happened. "I heard the police were at your place," he said. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to scream. Instead I said, "They found hidden cameras." He paused. "Cameras? In your unit?" "Yes. And they're investigating." He gave this weird laugh. "Well, I certainly didn't put them there. Maybe a previous tenant did. Or a maintenance worker. You can't just accuse me of something like that." His tone had changed, defensive, cold, like he was daring me to push further. I hung up. A few hours later I got another call, this time from the detective. They discovered the receiver was actively transmitting data to a remote device, one registered under Clark Property Management. That was all the proof they needed. Mr. Clark was arrested that night. Turns out he'd been installing cameras in multiple units, secretly recording tenants, and saving the footage on encrypted drives. They found recordings dating back over 4 years. The story hit the local news almost immediately. I saw his mugshot online, that same friendly smile now twisted into something chilling. My stomach turned. I kept thinking about all the times I'd felt like someone was in my apartment. All the moments I'd brushed off as just paranoia. I wasn't paranoid. I was being watched. But the worst part, the part that still makes my skin crawl, was what the police told me later. When they went through the files, they found footage labeled by tenant names. And mine had its own folder. The most recent video was from the night I heard footsteps. He'd been inside. Watching. Recording. I didn't go back to that apartment after Mr. Clark's arrest. The police said I could collect my belongings once they finished processing the scene, but just the thought of stepping inside that place made my stomach twist. Knowing what had been done there, what had been recorded there, made the entire apartment feel contaminated. Zoe came with me when it was finally time to pack. Even with the detectives gone, the space felt eerily hollow, like it was keeping secrets. I couldn't stop looking at the walls, the corners, the ceiling. Every flicker of light or shadow made me flinch. I boxed up my clothes, books, dishes, the things that were mine. But everything else, especially anything electronic, I left behind. It all felt tainted. I moved out that same day. In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. The police built a strong case. Mr. Clark faced multiple charges, including invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, and possession of illicit recordings. Apparently, the footage spanned several years and involved at least 8 tenants, most of whom were women who had lived alone. Some of the victims came forward publicly. I couldn't. Not yet. I felt this strange mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. I hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow I still felt violated. Like a part of me had been stolen. Zoe urged me to see a therapist, and honestly that was what helped me stay sane. Talking about it out loud, about how he'd tricked me, how easily he'd earned my trust, made me realize how calculated it all had been. He hadn't just hidden cameras. He'd hidden intent. The trial started 3 months later. I remember the first day clearly. The courtroom smelled faintly like disinfectant, and the buzz of murmuring voices echoed through the hall. When they brought him in, handcuffed, wearing that same smug little half-smile, something inside me cracked. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. Like he couldn't believe he'd actually been caught. The prosecutor laid everything out. The footage, the receipts for the equipment, the emails where he'd ordered microcameras under fake company names. And worst of all, the files neatly labeled with each tenant's name. When they showed screenshots of my apartment on the screen, I looked away. I couldn't stomach seeing my own life, my privacy, reduced to evidence. He barely reacted. When his lawyer tried to argue that the cameras were for security purposes, the courtroom actually laughed. Even the judge looked disgusted. After the trial ended for the day, a reporter stopped me in the hallway. She asked how I felt about everything that had happened. For a second I almost walked away. But then I said, he took something from me that I can't get back. And I want people to know this can happen, even when you think you're being careful. People don't realize how easy it is to miss something like that until it happens to them. Still, I tried to focus on the good. The other tenants who reached out, the strangers who shared their own similar stories. It made me realize I wasn't alone. When the verdict finally came, I didn't go to court in person. My lawyer called to tell me, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 10 years. It didn't feel like enough, but at least it was something. Later, I learned that the police were still trying to locate all the backups he might have made. Some of the footage had been uploaded to private servers. Others were stored on encrypted hard drives they couldn't access yet. That part haunted me more than anything else. Knowing that somewhere pieces of my life still existed on some hidden drive, unseen but not erased. A few months later, I finally found a new place. A small apartment across town, run by a property company instead of a single landlord. When I moved in, the first thing I did was sweep the rooms for cameras. Every vent. Every smoke detector. Every electrical outlet. I bought a signal detector, one of those devices that can pick up wireless transmitters, and scan the place for hidden lenses. It sounds paranoid, I know, but I couldn't help it. That's what his actions did to me. They rewired how I saw the world. Privacy stopped feeling like a right. It felt like a fragile illusion. Eventually, I started writing about it. Not online, not publicly, just in a journal. It became a way to make sense of the mess, to take back control over the story that had been twisted by someone else's actions. I started seeing patterns. The way he'd always been just a little too attentive, the way he'd insisted I call him directly for maintenance, how he'd shown up by accident, a few times when I got home early. All the signs had been there. I just thought he was being helpful. Predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like your friendly landlord who just wants to make sure everything's working fine. A year later, I received a letter from the DA's office. It was short, just an update. Mr. Clark's appeal had been denied. He'd serve his full sentence. I remember sitting down, holding that letter, and finally feeling something close to peace. Not closure, because you don't really get that after something like this, but peace. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. And that was enough. These days life feels quieter. I live alone again, but this time it's different. I've learned to trust myself. My instincts, my boundaries. Zoe still jokes about how I double lock everything and check my vents like it's a ritual, but she understands. Sometimes I think back to that night, the one when I heard footsteps, and I wonder how long he was standing there watching. How close he got. What he thought when he saw me grab that lamp and search the room. I'll never know. But I do know this, he'll never do it again. And that's what matters most.